Okay, welcome everybody. If you're watching this and recording, I also suggest you look at another presentation that we did on habit change, because today is going to be the next level. How do we keep our motivation, but also we release stress and we achieve the state of happiness? So let me share a few slides to recap what we did in the presentation on the habits, because the neurology and also the method are going to be similar. And here is the presentation slideshow. Hopefully you can see the slides. So my name is Darya Haitoglou. I'm a psychologist and the director of Virginia Satir Institute in the UK. And it is the presentation on stress, happiness, and motivation. Why is it important for me? My motivation is to help the big mission. 1 billion people lives changed to create congruent, love-rich, blame-free families and individuals, and help create a violence-free world, also based on where I come from. And as you can see, I work with many companies. You're in good hands. And today I would love to ask you this question: why are you here and what brought you to this topic? Because this will also make a difference how you learn, how long you will stay, what you will do with this information, and how helpful it will be for your life. My intention is to share a few insights from psychology, and also to look into some of the common sense, but also maybe not so common practice of happiness, stress, and motivation. They're all somehow connected. So let's start with happiness. What is happiness? Happiness is a state of well-being characterized by emotions ranging from contentment to intense joy. You choose your definition of happiness, what it means for you. There's a different level of arousal that is comfortable, or some people are comfortable with sort of more on the spectrum happiness, where it's kind of neutral, but a little bit of joy. But if it's too much, it's sort of like, ooh, too over the top. Or some people prefer this ecstatic happiness, but then they feel like if it's a little bit of joy, it's not enough happiness. Some people who are on the spectrum more towards the negative side of neuroticism, or maybe also depression, they might appreciate just a little moment of joy, like the Danish people call it hygge. It's just a cup of tea at the fireplace, having a chat with a nice friend. It could be a moment of happiness too. So what we define happiness is important. Let's look into the neuroscience of happiness and stress. Remember, our brain consists of different sort of networks, and we have two established networks that come from the reptilian part of our brain. They're at the back of our head, closer to the spine. And these networks are either connected or wired towards pain or pleasure. So it's the reward network and pain network. And of course, what we experience as pain, we want to move away from. And what we experience as joy, it could be physical pleasure, or having a good reputation, or being treated fairly, cooperation with others because of the social currency factor, giving to charity, or Schadenfreude, or like this concept when somebody is not doing well, but compared to that person, I feel, oh, I'm not so bad, actually. If that celebrity is doing not so well in her life, well, maybe my life is so Schadenfreude. And all this connected to this interest in the reward network in our brain. Whereas on the opposite, the pain network, even social exclusion as emotional pain, being treated unfairly, or negative social comparison, if we perceive it as painful, it activates this pain network that is almost like a physical pain. So imagine it could be an emotion that is connected to sadness or grief, or anger, but because the pain network is activated, we're trying to disconnect and move away from that. So our motivation is deeply rooted to run away from pain and towards reward. So how can we make this reward healthier? And how can we make it work for us long term so it creates more happy moments? That's a good question. Now, pain and stress, they have these three important hormones that are connected with. So adrenaline and noradrenaline. These guys are responsible for contraction of blood vessels. There's a lack of oxygen and glucose for neocortex, the new part of our brain structure. There's a funnel vision and thinking, rejecting new ideas and block creativity. And also, if we're not careful, if there's a chronic pain or chronic stress, then there is a hormone cortisol that weakens our immune system and reduces neurogenesis, which is rejuvenation of cells. So what we want is to make that kind of a short, motivational effort, but not chronic. Okay, stress is not too bad, but when it becomes chronic, it actually reduces our neurogenesis. Whereas pleasure, on the other hand, is connected to other hormones. For example, dopamine is responsible for our motivation and pleasure. We talk a little bit more about dopamine today. And also oxytocin, that is responsible for dilation of blood vessels that help oxygen and glucose to enter and supply neocortex, so we can think better, can make better decisions, and we can actually enjoy life more. So on the biological level, as well as neurological, right? These are also very important components when we talk about stress, happiness, and motivation. But there's always good news. Remember, we have this plastic brain that can change at any moment in time. I remember that research that I shared on the cab taxi drivers in London who learned maps of London, and then their hippocampus physically changed, it got enlarged thanks to the learning process. So as you're learning new skills, as you're learning how to change your habits, as you're learning how to be more positive maybe, or stay healthier, or doing other practices, meditating or doing therapy work, whatever you are up to, remember about this neuroplasticity, the concept that we can always change our brain even at a later stage in our life. Very, very important, because when we repeat the same action, we wire our brains differently. Musicians, for example, when they play music, they develop different their brain differently to linguists or to mechanical engineers. So professions we choose make a difference and changes the structure of our brain, as well as, of course, patterns and traumas, as well as triumphs of previous experiences in our life and lives of our predecessors, as we looked at transgenerational patterns and trauma in a different presentation. Now, I use the enrich method that I created based on the Satir model, and it works wonderful as a foundation for creating that healthier, happier, stress-free foundation for our being. So the enrich method, as you can see, consists of 6 different steps: explore, nourish, respond, imagine, communicate, and hugs. And they're all connected to different hormones. So explore is about dopamine release, nourish is about serotonin rebalance, respond is about cortisol and also release, but in a way detoxifying from that stress hormone, is learning how to respond rather than react. Imagine is about endorphins, communicate is about estrogen and having that harmony, and hugs is about oxytocin and the feel-good hormone, or the hug hormone, which is very important. So all together, that's an enrich method. And we've touched a little bit in different parts, in different presentations, but here's to give you a glimpse of how it works. So it's based on neuroscience, communication practice, and latest research, as well as body work. And we know that body is very important because the way how we position it, if we smile, if we have the open structure of our body, if we use our tonality of voice, the way we speak to ourselves, the way we look at ourselves, the way we gesture to ourselves. If we keep the open palms, if we hug ourselves, if we soothe ourselves, we feel better. If we smile, if we relax, if we put our tongue down and jaw relaxed and muscles, our facial muscles relaxed, then we feel more relaxed. Shoulders down, palms up, looking a little bit sort of a little bit happier. What is your happy stance? That's the body work that is very important in this particular topic. How do we create that happy state, stress-free state, and also motivation, because motivation is connected to that dopamine hormone that I mentioned. So let's look into some of the letters. For example, nourish. Remember, nourish is all about feeling nurtured, nourished, validated, appreciated. Is that having that validation shower? It's like every morning waking up and like, reading that affirmation list and believing and starting putting a really good fuel into yourself, good food, because good food means dopamine raise. Good food means also serotonin, and there's a lot of lists you can find of which foods can help with which hormones. Sleep is such a nourishing, wonderful, simple tool that is available, and also it rebalances testosterone when we sleep, and melatonin. It's very important, especially when there is a lot of sadness or grieving in a person's life, so sleep is crucial. Dopamine, like what is dopamine? So dopamine is a neurotransmitter that plays a role in motivation, risk-taking, memory function, behavior, and mood control. Low dopamine levels can cause depression, mood swings, sugar craving, addictions, low sex drive, poor attention and focus. And it's kind of a catch-22 effect, because when we have low motivation, our dopamine is low. When we have low dopamine, our motivation is low. So how do we look at it from functional perspective, but also holistic perspective? So from different aspects, remember that Satir mandala, what is your physical environment? How do you treat your body? But also how about your emotional state? What kind of emotions on that spectrum do you experience during a day, during a week? What is your mental state? How focused are you during a day? How many distractions and interruptions during the day do you have? Like, as a mother of young children, I know how difficult it is to concentrate when you have constant interruptions. So we need to have some form of focused time, because that's also important for our motivation, sustainability, and dopamine release. Because when we have that sense of achievement, sense of success, sense of reaching that maybe a little risky sort of choice that we make to, I just published a book. Wow, it was risky, but okay, I've done it, and I feel like good about myself. So dopamine is released. Or I managed to learn a new skill, or to go for a run, or to do something outside of my comfort zone, something new. So I broke the established routine of the old status quo of work and sleep and watching television, and did something instead. So that's my motivation, but also the dopamine release. And it's important to have that uninterrupted time during the day. So even 40 minutes during the day, if you can find 40 minutes and focus and concentrate on something that you love, that's a great boost for dopamine. Now, what causes dopamine drop? As we said, dopamine levels are depleted by stress, poor nutrition, and poor sleep. Alcohol, caffeine, and sugar all seem to decrease dopamine activity in the brain in the long run. So be careful and just do the inventory of what you consume during a day, during your week. Because we cannot help but being influenced by the simple little steps we make, little decisions we make. Short-term, they lead to the habits, and long-term strategic behavior choices. So how to raise dopamine level? Dopamine is manufactured by breaking down the amino acid called tyrosine. Tyrosine can be obtained from food sources, more precisely from foods high in tyrosine, an amino acid precursor that crosses the blood-brain barrier and converts to dopamine. If you eat too many carbs and feel tired, you may want to consider shifting to foods that boost dopamine level, like bananas, green tea, watermelon, turmeric, spirulina, veggies, ginseng, oregano oil, apples, etc. It's so funny, I'm a psychologist, but I talk about nutrition because it goes hand in hand. And actually, we should look at all of them as factors that influence psychological levels of our motivation, but also how that is sort of the chicken and egg. We don't know really if one can change everything. So let's look at all the factors together. And I always prefer to start from the bottom of the Maslow pyramid, or I call it the ladder of needs. Actually, at the bottom, we have all the physical needs, the survival needs. So we need food, we need shelter, we need safety. But then as we feel nourished, then we can go into the higher levels of needs, more about respect or social currency, social appreciation, that validation, and then eventually to self-actualization. But remember, we all start first in the physical domain. So that is very important too. And many psychologists or therapists forget about it. They only concentrate on mental and emotional state of a person. But actually, the problem might be that the iron is so low, that deficient in the basic nutrients. And this can be just looked at that level, and then support with the healthy mindset or beliefs about themselves. Okay, so for example, the letter R is about responding mindfully rather than reacting. Meditation and self-awareness, or expanding the consciousness, or learning how to communicate in a way in order to respond rather than react. I call it stasis kinesis, the way how we learned as children to react because of our parental, maybe dysfunctional communication strategies. But then we become adults ourselves and we learn how to respond and become more congruent, become more self-aware. And with that, we change the way how our chemistry and our body functions. So serotonin level changes, also cortisol and adrenaline levels also change. And that's an art and science of communication, of course, but responding to stress, learning about yourself and learning where is a comfortable zone for you, where to stop. I love the traffic light theory. So what we do, for example, with our children, when I'm aware of my own state, I say, oh, I'm in the green zone, guys, let's play, let's connect, let's get together. When I feel triggerish, or I'm just about to react instead of responding, I say, hey, I'm in a yellow zone. Can you please give me some space? Or hug me. I'm a very kinesthetic and tactile being. So they know that they don't want me to go to red zone. That's a bad zone for me. But I have a way to move to the green zone from the yellow zone. Now, once I'm in a red zone, they know I'm like, red zone. They need to just leave me in that very moment. And I need time to decompress, detoxify, and learn how to get back into my parasympathetic nervous system response from sympathetic activated stress response. And that takes, some time. We are all wired differently, but also similarly. So we do have the same predispositions. We do have the same strategies, how we work with stress. And I'll touch upon those in a moment. So moving forward, I, for Imagine in the Enrich method, is about imagining and using these imagine your happy place, for example, to boost the endorphins. And that's a great practice. Imagination is much more powerful than will, as Albert Einstein used to say. And I use this practice also for motivation, but there is a big but to it. A lot of people think that if they can imagine the end result, they will be very much motivated to achieve it. And the research, especially the recent research, says the opposite. People who imagine and spend a lot of time just imagining they're rich, or they're successful, they're healthy, or they've lost weight, and just imagine that last sort of result that they want. They sap the energy required to reach that result. And instead of imagining the final outcome, what I recommend is chunk it down to very actionable and measurable and tangible steps. Remember, the goals need to be smart. They need to be time bound. They need to be also, you need to be able to measure them. You also need to be strategic, but also they need to feel easy to be done. So every step, you can imagine, it's like a recipe. You know which ingredients to put first, how to make that soup, how to boil the water, put what kind of herbs at what point in time. And as you imagine and you visualize it, you go from step to step, and that's what's gonna work. Remember that experiment with the basketball team when they were divided into 3 subgroups, and one subgroup was asked to play and throw a ball into a net. The second subgroup was asked to sit and imagine just shooting and hitting that who every single time they would throw a ball, but imagine and train sort of that practice. And the third subgroup were asked to do nothing, just to sit. And after some time, they measured the results, and the interesting bit was, okay, the group that practiced improved versus the group that did nothing. But most interesting was that the group that imagined throwing and hitting and visualizing and imagining not just the result of winning, but actual practice, what it would take to hit that ball, hit that net, got the most scores. So that's a fascinating, I think, discovery for all of us, for our motivation, for our happy place, but also for how to imagine things in the morning, to fall asleep before falling asleep. It's very, very two important moments. So take it seriously and use your imagination to your benefits. C, connect and communicate, is about serotonin boost, and also is about estrogens, because when we connect, when we communicate with others, we have that sort of mirror neurons connecting, and we also want to, in order to connect, to feel more empathetic, right? For us to feel more empathetic, we need to feel how the other person feels. And in that way, what's important is to connect with people who you feel inspired by, who you feel motivated by, who really are just one step ahead of you in whatever you want to achieve, right? Your motivation will be inspired, will be connected to that person. So they say, tell me who your friends are, I'll tell you who you are, or who are your 5 best friends, right? Think about those friends' qualities. What are you attracted to? And make it more strategic, make it more mindful how you connect with these people, because your chemistry on the inside will also change based on your connection, on your communication practice. And hugs and humor. It's all about oxytocin boost, but also endorphins. And when we hug, even hugging a tree or a pet or yourself, it's a very good practice through haptics, through that Purkinje corpuscles, the tiny little cells in our fingertips. And when we touch, when we connect with another body skin, or even with our own skin, it sends a signal again to relax our nervous system and to feel much better, release stress, connect to our happy place. Of course, if there's a trauma involved, that needs to be done with a trauma specialist and a therapy, because there's some let's say ways to hug that is safer versus other kinds of hugs. So take it with your own environment and context that you are in, of course. So that's the enrich method: explore, nourish, respond, imagine, communicate, and hugs. Now, I also use a stress mastering toolbox that is inspired by the work of Virginia Satir, who was the pioneer of family therapy and the mother of family therapy, as we like to call her. And stress mastering toolbox for me consists of the practice I call stasis kinesis, which consists of how we move from stress to flow with our body. So I'm going to just go quickly through that. So there are 5 stress stances that were created. 4 were created by Virginia Satir and 1 by her student, Sharon Lotion. So these 5 stress stances are observed across the globe. It doesn't matter where the person comes from, what the gender or background is, but it's the way how we cope with stress and how we communicate, how we learn, how we respond, or actually how we react. And the idea is that we move from the stress stances to more congruent leveled stance. The first stress stance is blaming. So we'll go one by one, but let me just go through the flow as well. So there are 5 also antidotes to that, which is very exciting. So the first is blaming, and it is all about putting the focus of the blame on the outside. It can be a thing or a person, and it's about the hormone of testosterone, and it's about this fighting or blaming behavior, but the needs are for protection, for peace, for safety. So what we can do instead of a blaming stance is to turn it into a peaceful warrior by raising our hand and experiencing the change in our body, even as we just practice this change of hand gesture. There's a different chemistry in our body with the same testosterone hormone, but from a negative to more positive stance. The second one is a placator. The hormone is estrogen, and it's about begging for forgiveness. It's about seeing the person who's in front as a person who knows everything, as a hierarchical person. I'm small, little, very common for good children. You know, when the person, a little person, a child takes all the blame on themselves, even when the fault is on the parent. But because out of love, the child wants to receive the love from a parent, they placate out of love, the need for love and care, the need for strength and stability. And what we want is from that placator turn into a power tree, when the person can experience the transition in their body. And especially this work when it's done with children, or with children, especially with children that come from either fusion families, or when parents are not available, maybe I've done the work in orphanages, for example. It's such a potent piece of work for children to do reconstruction in this work with triads, so people can represent their mother and father. And a lot of the mixed families have different strategies on how to deal with stress. So a lot of children would blame, a lot of children would placate, and doing this body work helps them release something that is so toxic, and something that they've learned out of necessity, out of surviving, and move them into more thriving, more happy stance, away from stress, more towards a motivation that is intrinsic rather than extrinsic. That's also a very important part. Super reasonable stance is a third one, is when the focus is on facts and figures, and it's about hormone serotonin, and it's about creating that shell. But the need is to be accepted, to be understood, to have that sense of wisdom. But instead, the person would just keep monologuing or critiquing and sort of passive aggressive, super reasonable, sort of computing kind of style. And instead of doing that, we move from stress to flow, where a person would just bow and imagine they're a humble monk instead of a super reasonable. And that helps to sort of soothe that ego side, and still have the same need, but in a body work kind of perspective. It helps to connect in a different way and release stress. The fourth stance is called distractor or irrelevant, and it's about dopamine release. It's distracted, it's in chaos. It's like a person with three hands, sort of, oh, let's talk about the weather today, or did you have a cup of tea? Would you like to have? So not talking about difficult parts of conversation, sort of hiding away from that. And the need is for harmony, stability, and courage. And instead of distracting, the antidote stance is core harmonizer, is when there's kind of a Tai Chi person, so feeling the core on the inside and having open arms, stable arms, courageous smile, and feeling that harmony. And the final fifth one is the added one called withdrawer. The antidote is called world hugger. Sort of withdrawing is all about moving away, not talking at all about the challenging part of the reality, whatever that is. Maybe a conflict, or maybe something that's so painful that the person disconnects from the reality, maybe doing spiritual bypass or addictive behavior, and moving away from that pain into the cave zone, I call it. So instead, it's opening up and doing this gesture like a world hugger. Imagine hugging the world, and sort of hugging gesture to also help the release of the oxytocin. Oxytocin, as we said, it's a hormone of trust, so that with trust we also connect rather than withdraw. And the need for touch, for openness, for trust, hopefully is fulfilled. But that's the body work part, where the body knows, the body keeps the score, the body remembers all the traumas, all the triumphs from generation to generation. So what we want is to move a little bit those neurons and the connections into more possibilities for us to establish more congruent stance, so we can have that opportunity to feel happier, less stressed, and respond rather than react to a reality that is all around us. So that's a summary of a little bit of stress, a little bit of happiness, a little bit of motivation. But of course, we can talk a lot more about motivation and the theories and that ladder of needs, but also a different needs that motivate and govern. So let me just stop the sharing of the slides. Stop share. And let's just look into some of the things that motivation is about. So I mentioned intrinsic and extrinsic. So for those of you who are curious, intrinsic motivation is something that is motivation on the inside. Okay, how do we bring that? Because intrinsic motivation is the most important motivation. If you want to change something, coming from within is the best way to do it. Extrinsic motivation also works, but it works in a short term rather than long term. So if, for example, a person is not showing the behavior that we like a pet person or a child, right? So the prefrontal, of course, is not developed. Very similar to pet, how pets are trained. There is an extrinsic motivation, a reward, for example, that is introduced, very much Pavlovian kind of behavior-based motivation. And it may work, for example, giving them a treat, giving them a challenge or a motivation to do whatever, their homework, or pick up their toys or clean the dishes. But if we keep the same reward, it actually does not work long term, because the brain gets adjusted, or let's say we adjust to the environment, to those triggers, to those motivating factors, and we want either more, or we just don't want that because it's not fun anymore, it's not challenging anymore, it's not, sort of kind of becomes a routine, becomes an obligation, and nobody wants that painful obligation, to be honest. Also, if a person had an intrinsic motivation and we start adding extrinsic motivation, let's say an additional pay, right? If a person was motivated anyway and we give them more and more and more extrinsic motivation, it actually can backfire and can stop that intrinsic motivation, which something we need to be careful about. So, as a rule of thumb, we want to give a short-term external motivation for something that is not at all showing signs of intrinsic motivation. But once there is some sort of intrinsic motivation, we should not give long-term external motivation benefits, okay? So that's very important. Another thing that we can look into is this whole structure of needs, okay? So based on the Maslow, but also slightly different, if you think of all human beings, we all have our needs for, let's say, safety, right? The base one. Then we have needs for variety. Then we have needs for love and connection. We have needs for respect or significance in the society where we belong. Then we have this need for growth, and the last one is for contribution, sort of the growth of others. So the first four are the needs of the person, and then the top two are sort of the needs of the more higher values, for the growth. It's like in a hierarchy of Maslow, is that closer to self-actualization needs. And the interesting bit is, in order for us to feel super motivated and use our motivation to our advantage, is to find out of all these 6 needs, which one is driving us the most? And they can change throughout our life. And they all can be present, but we are driven by one need the most at any given moment. So, for example, if a person is driven by the need of safety, so they want to have stability, safety, and security. It's important to use that, once you know about yourself, to use that as a motivating factor to do something in order, for example, if you want to feel happier, what helps you feel happier? If your need is for security, safety, and stability, making sort of safety net plan of financial security or savings could be an option, or building a house, or having that connection to the ground, having that stability, having a consistent routine. Okay, if a person's driven and motivated by variety, the motivational factors like I've just described will not be good enough for that person. They will need to have a challenge that is changing their routine, giving them variety, traveling more, changing the context, connecting with different people, etc. So looking at that lens more carefully and finding those rewards, but also motivating factors within that need is very, very important. And satisfying that need, because it is going to be the most important driven factor. Then, for example, a need for significance, that sense of appreciation, sense of validation, sense of respect from the people who you care about, like your close ones, your family members, or maybe your boss, or the people in the community. How can you get more of those rewards as you motivate yourself to go about your daily life and to feel happier, and looking at that need more carefully? Then love and connection. If love and connection is the main driving force and the main need for you at this moment in time, how can you connect with more beloved people deeper? Okay, how can you express the sense of love and receive that love so that you feel happier and motivated more? And that helps also release your stress levels. If you're motivated and your need is for growth, for example, my most important need is for growth. If I don't grow, I wither away and I feel like I'm dying. Even if my security is there, if variety is there, if love and connection is there, if significance is there, but if I'm not growing and I'm not learning, I feel like a failure. It's very, very interesting how our needs drive our feeling of happiness and motivation. So knowing that, I motivate myself by saying, okay, I can do this routine that is really boring, but I can make, like I can learn something, I can sign up for this course, or I can read that book and learn a new skill, okay? And then if you're driven by contribution and growth of others, how can you bring more philanthropical projects, or some sort of community projects where you see the development of others? So all these needs are very nicely, neatly connected to your motivation, to also you feeling happier. And there's a trick about it. If you want to go like ballistic, like boosted motivation, if you really want to do something, you need to find an activity or a person that satisfies 3 of your needs, including your top 1. Okay, so if that activity or that person, maybe your partner or maybe your colleague or maybe your friend, satisfies 3 of these needs, this is a connection forever. And in many cases, it also can be an addiction. So be careful what kind of things satisfy your needs. And in order for us to change our addictions, we need to look at our habits and how to break them, how to chunk them down to simple, actionable, measurable little steps that are easy to implement, with having a long-term intrinsic motivation. For example, I'm motivated to change myself for better because I want to be a better role model that is beyond me, for my children, for my grandchildren, or be a role model for my community, or help my friend achieve her activity, or feel better, or fight cancer. So something that is really big, beyond yourself, that you connected with, and this is gonna help you, okay, tackle those addictive behaviors that very often satisfy more than 3 needs of ours. And that's something that you can start paying attention to if you want to change whatever habit that you have, or motivate yourself to do something, to be healthier, to live a better life, to make healthier decisions, or whatever you want to do. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. We can have a lot more discussions about motivation, because it's a topic that is so broad. There are different theories of motivation, but also different practical applications. So what I recommend, if you're interested, and something that is very simple and easy written, is if you Google a website that has a lot of that's connected to motivation, is verywellmind.com, and you just search motivation, because there's what motivation theory can tell us about human behavior. There's what to do when you have no motivation pages. There's a few pages about motivation and different components, for example, how to activate yourself, how to keep the persistence, how to have the intensity. And this combination of 3 actually is an important one, according to the theory of motivation, the intrinsic and instinct theory. There's a humanistic theory, such as Maslow's hierarchy of needs we discussed. There's also information about the use of motivation, or impact of motivation, tips for finding motivation, potential pitfalls of motivation, and history of motivation. So you can find different resources on this website, and it's written in a very simple language. And yeah, there's a lot more over there, but of course you can reach out to me. I'm at Instagram at the.family.psychologist, or daryahaitoglou.com, my website. So looking forward to hearing back from you, and have a great day with lots of motivation.